Religion must be observed seriously on all occasions. A quote by Maria Theresa, which very much sums up her period of reign in which most of these monasteries were built, not founded. And with this lecture, I would like to take you to some of the grand Austrian monasteries and explain their individual histories and their common grounds, as well as their abbots' characteristics with a focus on the 18th century, their architecture, their order structures, their destruction and rise, but also their self-image, which have contributed to create and keep or lose collections. The art collections of the monasteries developed in accordance with the circumstances of the times. One cannot assume a stringent collection goal, but rather a microcosm of the respective abbot, and later the curators and their zeitgeist. To step inside the imposing monasteries feels like entering a universe of its own, and you can see from my first picture, my title picture, it's a spiral staircase in the monastery of Melk, which I will only show you briefly. Here's Stift Melk, which is quite close to Vienna. It's in the region of the Wachau. It's a wine region with several monasteries, actually. And Melk is the grandest of them. And it was built by the architect specialist Jakob Brandauer. He was one of the greatest monastery architects who also did the occasional palace. And as you will see, there won't be much difference on some levels between a palace of the Baroque era or a monastery. And also, since 2015, this area has become a UNESCO World Heritage, and so did the monasteries, which you can see and visit on these grounds along the Danube. It's the Danube which you see flowing by, and one of the details I like very much about this monastery is the terrace, which you see here, which is overlooking the Danube. Never mind the parking lot. It wasn't meant to be there. There was a rock, as you can see, going down to the Danube, and the Danube was filled up here to create a parking lot in the bad days of the last decades of the 20th century. But otherwise, if you stand on this terrace as the sun goes down, it just gives you an impression of how heaven and earth connect through architecture. And of course, it's all built to praise the Lord. There were two main triggers for the splendor and importance of the newly risen monasteries in the Baroque period. And they were the Reformation, which fell on fruitful soil in many parts of the Austrian lands from the first half of the 16th century onwards, and called for the Counter-Reformation on stage as a reaction of the Habsburg rulers to the Protestant threat, which included, from today's perspective, soft democratic tendencies like religious services held in German for everyone to understand. The Augsburg Peace Treaty of 1555 allowed rulers to determine the religion in their states. The House of Habsburg has always strongly identified with Catholicism. And the battle at the Weißer Berg, the White Mountain near Prague in 1620, between the Protestant Bohemian troops and the Catholic Imperial forces was won by the latter and marked the end of the rise of the Reformation movement. Bohemia and Austria were recatholized, eventually supported by the religious foundations. Another major and traumatizing threat were the Turkish wars, culminating in the siege of Vienna in 1683 and leaving incredible destruction and bloodshed. behind, also in the surrounding countryside amongst the monasteries. Here I just show you briefly a map, so you can see how the monasteries are distributed in on the Austrian territory. And I'm not speaking about all of them. Don't worry, it would not be possible. It's in preparation of this lecture, I realized how complex the topic was, and even though each of them has their special attractions, it's just impossible to include them all. So I have picked those who can tell representative story and different stories which explain also some of the Austrian history and the Habsburg history. And this is an interesting marketing feature. Österreich and Klöster. Klöster is the plural of Kloster, of monastery. So they combined the two words to make it Klösterreich, and all these monasteries are connected on a cultural and economic level concerning tourism, mostly. So, most of these monasteries were founded about 1,000 years ago, or even earlier. And the original founders were mostly members of noble descent who decided to express their gratitude for having been spared from disaster, or having experienced a miracle, or simply to guarantee their redemption from sin, one of the main points of protest against Catholicism on the side of the reformers, by the way, to be able to buy oneself out of hell, apart from the transubstantiation, about which we will talk later, and thus to gain an afterlife in heaven. On earth, the founding enabled to secure territory and power, as well as economic and cultural progress. A church was built and consecrated, and monks moved to the site. With them, a monastery was associated to manage and to maintain the new holy establishment. This is also the moment when a treasure is needed, from which eventually a collection was built. Not only the monastery was founded, but also objects were needed for the church services and for the furnishings of the church, all to the glory of God. Thus the ceremonial required the most precious materials. And the founders not only found the site, which was usually a special ground which already had a legend, or to which a legend was invented, or it was just, as you saw in the case of Melk and with other Benedictine abbeys especially, they were built on a hill overlooking the countryside, also for security reasons, but also to, of course, gain even more of an imposing aspect. And here we have a fresco which can be found in the Abbey of St. Paul in Carinthia, about which I will speak later again, also in terms of porcelain. And this monastery was founded by Count Engelbert von Spanheim, Margrave of Istria, and his wife Hedwig, and it was typical to portray ideal portraits of the founders. And so this is the founding couple, and they are guarded by two saints, by Saint Catherine and by Saint Benedict, who's also the patron saint of the order. And as you see, they founded the monastery in 1091, and the fresco was painted in the church in 1493. So it's an ideal vision of two founding people kneeling and praying for being healed from their sins or from other earthly obstacles. Now we come back to the House of Habsburg, and here we have some items which are related to Charles VI and to his daughter Maria Theresa. On the left is a dalmatica from the red velvet regalia from 1724, from the Schatzkammer, the geistliche Schatzkammer, the ecclesiastical Schatzkammer in the Vienna Kunsthistorisches Museum. And it has been hand embroidered at the court. We don't know exactly whether it was Maria Theresa herself who worked on it, or other archduchesses, and the ladies in waiting were also often invited to work on these ecclesiastical garments, and they either embroidered, and they also used older materials, reused them to create some splendid objects to be worn at special church services. And here we also have a very, very precious velvet from Genoa, which was imported especially for this occasion, and also laces, which happened often, taken from dresses, which were no longer worn by the empress, for example, and they were then attached to really make these garments more special and more personal. There was something personal given to them. It was also a kind of gesture of offering something to the church, some personal, precious belongings. And this dalmatica is part of a larger series of garments, and it was used for the Imperial court church services. And on the right side you see a chalice which is very richly decorated. It's by Joseph Moser, who was court goldsmith at the time. It's a chalice, it's dated slightly later, it's 1775, but it was used in Maria Theresa's very personal chapel. And her son then gave it to the Schatzkammer in Vienna, but it was used for the personal services of Maria Theresa at the time. And Joseph Moser, he worked for the court for many decades, and you will see more work by him. And the jewels you see were often also taken from jewels which belonged to the empress, for example, or the archduchesses, and then worked into these splendid pieces of gilt silver. And one of the features I really like very much about this chalice, it's this part, it's an incense burner, and you can see the smoke rising, which is a really delicate, nice feature which alludes to the tradition of incense burners with which you surrounded these holy objects and their contents, of course, with the incense. And in the center you can see a publication. It's called the Daily Prayer Exercises for the use of Her Imperial Majesty, the Queen of Hungary in Bohemia, Maria Theresa, with gracious prayers for the most noble feasts of the Church. And it was also published in 1778, at the time when the chalice was made. And objects like this, publications like this, weren't really printed for the empress, but for the public. And you could buy these publications and pray the same prayers as Maria Theresa did. It was had a special meaning, of course, to the pious subjects. So next monastery is the Augustinian monastery of Saint Florian. And as you can see, it's also a very large area dedicated to the various buildings needed for a monastery. You have, of course, the church, and then you have all these parts, which this one is for the abbot. He was reigning really in a rather princely style in this period of time, and he was also usually the abbots of these monasteries are very important and close to the imperial family and advisors to the emperor, for example, and also spend time at court to be close, and also that the emperor had some advice from a different source. And this building is also built by Brandauer, by the architect who built Stift Melk. And here you can see an ideal view by Bartolomeo Altomonte. He and his son were famous painters, church fresco painters, but also painting the more worldly parts of these monasteries. And you can see the extension of it, and the formal gardens, the kitchen gardens. And at this time, it wasn't surrounded as closely by the village or by the cities. Nowadays, of course, villages have grown closer to the monasteries, which wasn't the case at that time. That's the entrance. And Saint Florian, he's the patron saint of, for example, the fire brigades, and he's still celebrated today in Austria. And the story is that this monastery was founded on his grave. He was killed. He was a martyr, and he was killed by fire. And on his grave, this monastery was founded. So it has a special meaning, and the patron saints are celebrated on their days with large feasts, which, especially in the Baroque periods, were of an amazing extension, and were really compared with court festivities. And that's the entrance. It's a photograph of the early 20th century, which I think has a special atmosphere. And you can see here the coat of arms of the abbot of that period, who was said to have been a very glamorous person. And here he is, the Prevost Johann Baptist Födermeier. All those of you who like Dupaquet porcelain might have heard of him and seen this amazing écuelle with its stand showing his coat of arms, which we just saw at the entrance. And here he is on this print, residing over his monastery. And here's his coat of arms again. And it's also, here you have incense burners, smoking again. And these are parts of his coat of arms shown again as emblems. And here I'm grateful to Joe Kosha, who has sent me these images again from our old days of Fired by Passion. And I remember having gone to St. Florian with him with all of his photographic tools and materials. And it was an amazing day seeing him taking these pictures. And this object is at the MAC Vienna, and interesting, quite a few of monastic porcelain commissions were sold in the 1920s to the Museum of Applied Arts in Vienna, and here they are. So with all things Dupaquet, it's always worth to look inside or underneath or onto the details. And I think this is a very splendid piece which very well illustrates the abbot's tastes. Just like does the great marble hall at St. Florian, which is dedicated to this one topic I mentioned before, the threat of the Turkish armies, which were overcome at that time, but wars were still going on, and here and there, a little further away from Vienna, especially in Hungary, Hungary was occupied by the Turkish armies for quite a while, and Prince Eugen, whom you see here, Prince Eugene of Savoy, he was a great hero because he fought many successful battles against the Turkish troops. And he was supported, of course, by the Emperor Charles VI. Both pictures also by Altomonte, who also painted the ceiling together with his son in 1724. And the portraits are life-size, and they were painted in 1728. And imagine also the amount of work which went into the frames, which was made specially by a sculptor. And luckily, someone was working on these archival materials there in the late 19th century and published all the bills which went to the account of the Abbot. It was Albin Czerny in 1886, and the book is called Kunstgewerbe im Stift St. Florian, and it's quite an amazing source. And that's the ceiling painting, and you can see Jupiter in the clouds, having one of his foot on one of the Turkish warriors. Typical iconography of this period of time, and you have Austria and Hungary kneeling in front of him, being united again because Prince Eugene freed Hungary from the Turks. But of course it was then incorporated again in the Habsburg Empire. And you see the colors of the Austrian coat of arms, and you can see an angel bearing a flag, and which says the empire was dedicated to you for until the end of times, and all these angels bringing glory and laurels. So it's quite, it's not a very religious subject, and it's a very political statement, which adorns this great hall, and it wasn't also meant for any religious festivities, but to welcome the emperor. Every time the emperor came by, a great feast was organized in this hall and just reminded the emperor of his great deeds to free the country. And when the emperor visited in 1731, we can read in his diary a very short comment about the abbot and about the abbey itself. He said, "Zu magnifique," too magnificent. Full stop. So it was even for his taste, the abbot went just a little bit too far. Over the top, exactly. And for the dining, with Joe, we photographed this, just remaining parts. There are just a few left of a large service in blue and white, a Dupaquier service of around 1730, which also shows this typical shape, which actually is still done at the Augarten, called Belvedere nowadays. It's very popular indeed, which is nice. I think Dupaquier would have been very pleased. And it's inspired by a Chinese shape, and also decoration-wise, it was one of the earliest decorations, these pure blue and white. And Dupaquier, as you know, was the first in Europe to do whole services for the dinner table. And these are still at the Stift. They weren't regarded as to be special. Actually, when we arrived there, no one really thought about them being du paquet. And that's also probably the reason why the mark didn't attempt to buy them at the time in the 1920s. And that's the library. Of course, each of these monasteries, one of the main things besides the church, main architectural devices, is a library which contains thousands and thousands of books and is also similarly decorated as the Great Hall, for example. There are always these amazing ceiling paintings which usually in these areas like the library have more mythological themes rather than biblical themes. And they're usually really wonderful library furniture as well. And that's the church. In all these monastery, music plays a very important part. And here you have the organ, you see the organ on the right side with all these putti singing and playing musical instruments. And now there is a detail of a putto holding a piece of music for the singing and praisal of God, of course. And then each of the monasteries has their Kaiserzimmer. It's a suite of rooms which were reserved for the emperor and the empress and their family. And it's mostly in monasteries which are along, at the river Danube, for example, where, of course, the emperor was traveling by boat. It was the easiest way at the time. And here we have an outstanding piece of furniture. It's dedicated to Prince Eugene of Savoy, and it was made in 1711. It's a piece of sculpture, but it's a bed at the same time, and you can see the trophies around it. And at the front, 2 Turkish soldiers with their arms behind their backs, tied to the bed. And then a small angel in a Turkish tent, a putto really, and then other putti with playing the drums and just announcing the victory. And on the left side you can see a printed source by Andreas Matthias Wolfgang about Prince Eugene, and it's from a series which depict the battles, and this one is the battle in Hungary, which Eugene fought and won for Austria. And this bed is said to have been made for him, but no one has ever slept in it, as far as we know. So it would have been rather a disturbing night, I think. Even for people like Prince Eugene, who proved his fame on the battlefield. But in any case, it was a very traumatic experience, this siege of Vienna in 1683, which really stayed with the population for a very, very long time. And even though the troops never came as close as to Vienna again, but Hungary is close by, and I think there was quite a big relief when Prince Eugene did what he was supposed to do, and then the building boom started again, and of course Prince Eugene and all the monasteries were given means to extend their precious glory. And just to show you how the abbot was residing, there was this amazing garden pavilion, and it was a very pleasant garden place. And these images are from the early 20th century, and they show this garden pavilion in lesser, in a less glorious state. You see the garden is not really well maintained, and you can also see that some harvest is gathered here on the terrace, so it must have been used for a different purpose at this time than it was in the 18th century. And as I told you, many of the pieces of the objects of the collections were sold in the 1920s. Especially the time between the wars, after the end of the monarchy, were very difficult for these monasteries, also economically, of course. And this is the Cistercian monastery of Zwettl, which all porcelain lovers might also know well, because the Mack also bought from them the very famous Zwettl dessert centerpiece, which was commissioned in 1767 and delivered a year later. And it was commissioned for Abbot Rainer I Kollmann, who you see on the left, and a portrait of 1760. And it was his 50th profession of faith jubilee. And it's a white. It's very interesting because there's often the question, have there been white figures sold by the manufacturer or commissioned even? And I think this really gives you the idea that some people preferred the white. It was more sculptural, if one liked it. And of course, one also has to say it wasn't as costly as the painted pieces of porcelain. And here you have some wonderful details, and the centerpiece of it all is porcelain making. Putti making porcelain at a kiln, and here you also have a wonderful depiction of fire and smoke rising. And the Putti, this one, is holding a jug in the smoke which evaporates from the kiln, and this one is creating a figure. It's a really wonderful piece, which is quite unique as well. And below you can see a photograph from the famous 1904 exhibition where the centerpiece was exhibited, still owned by Stift Zwettl at the time. And here I show you the four cardinal virtues, which are very important as well in the monasteries, but also at court. For the Habsburgs, these four cardinal virtues were the most important. And just for the porcelain lovers, the reverse sides, which are beautifully modeled, and also the undersides where you can see the Viennese mark, the blue shield of the Babenberger coat of arms, and also of course here they already have the inventory numbers of the mark, but also their numbering, probably how they were displayed on their mirrored centerpieces. Yeah, and Joseph Haydn, on the occasion of this jubilee, was asked to write a piece of music, and it turned out to be a very long piece of music, a so-called applausus. It's a special genre of music in C major, and he delivered it in 1768, and he was very disappointed that he wasn't invited to direct the orchestra, which consisted mostly of monks who were very gifted musicians. And this is also one special aspect of these monasteries. All the monks, inhabitants of this monastery, were given special tasks according to their talents. They were educated, and it's still done today. Many of them study economics or other useful things which work within their universe. And so Haydn said, firstly, I would like to ask you, the orchestra, to observe strictly all the tempi, and since the whole text applauds, I would rather have the allegros taken a bit more quickly than usual. So that's he was very nervous about it, apparently, and he wasn't even told for which occasion he should compose this piece. But interestingly, I just showed you the 4 cardinal virtues, and they appear as singing voices, and they sing in duets or quartets together. And I also show you here detail with one of the smaller figures. It's Puto with the mask, probably on his way to a masked ball or to the theatre stage. And here is a detail, one part of the stage of this centerpiece. This is just a small taste of the piece of music which was commissioned to accompany this centerpiece on the occasion. And just to show you what has been done to the centerpiece recently, there was an exhibition at the Museum of Applied Arts called The Fest, and an artist called Thomas Hörl, an Austrian artist. He designed some disguise for these figures, and it was a great success. And interestingly, many of the visitors said, "Oh, we've never seen this centerpiece, although it's on display for the past 20 years in the Baroque hall where the Dubski-Zimmer is shown." So no one noticed it until, even though it's in a Donald Judd display case, until it got disguised and got some color. And he put fabric, he was really sewing little masks and hats and skirts and all kinds of things for these figures. And it apparently changed their appearance so much that people, even many people who don't really care about porcelain were suddenly enchanted by it. So I think it's very interesting for us museum people. It's a bit daring, I think. I don't know if I would have done it, but nothing happened to it, and it was indeed a great success. Now, the next monastery, St. Paul im Lavantal. It's established in 1091, and you see it was established again in 1809. And in between, something unexpected happened. And this Stift, this abbey, is telling a very interesting story, also related to the Habsburgs. And it is, as you can see, placed on a small hill, perfectly overlooking the valleys, in a small town of the same name, and the river Lavand is flowing by, and it's in southern Austria, not too far from the Slovenian borders. And the history of the monastery takes a few unexpected turns during the 932 years of its history so far, and contains a strong political aspect, especially in the late 18th and early 19th century. And as you might know, one concerns also porcelain, and the Abbey of St. Blasien in the Black Forest, at the time Vorderösterreich. And in the later 18th century, Joseph II, son of Maria Theresa, and then Emperor Joseph II, he closed many of the museums in Austria. He was the enlightened, reformist emperor, and he, I mean, just to explain it very briefly, he was closing most of the monasteries because they didn't, in his eyes, just say it in very simple words, not contribute to the goal and to society as he imagined them to do. And the same happened to Stift St. Blasien in the Black Forest, which were also Benedictine friars. And they came up with an interesting idea because they, before it, you know, when the danger arose at the horizon to close down, because what you do, you can just go somewhere else, but where to? Because most of the other monasteries are not available anymore. And so at the Black Forest, there was an abbot, Prince Abbot Martin Gerbert, who you see on the right side, and this is Stift St. Blasien in the Black Forest on the left. And Abbot Gerbert came up with a brilliant idea. You know that the Habsburgs, their Stammschloss is on Swiss grounds, and in Basel, some of the very early members of the family are buried or were buried, and he had the brilliant idea of taking them to their remains, to the St. Blasien Abbey, his idea was to prevent them from being closed, to become a really important place within the Habsburg realm and the family interests as well. So he came to Vienna, visited Maria Theresa, who gave him the cross, the pectorale, which he's wearing. It's a typical piece of jewellery, crucifixes, which abbots wear as a sign of their dignity and their importance as well. So he came to visit Maria Theresa and told her about his plans. And what she said was, I now see that you love your abbey, she told him, and because of you, I will love it too. And he gave him a hand-embroidered vestment, hand-embroidered by herself. And on March 24, she sent a letter with a du paquet service. But just one word about this tomb, which was never realized, but it was planned in 1791. And to me, it looks very much like some designs of revolutionary architecture. It's very simple, and it has this enlightened appeal, I think, or feeling. So he was very successful, and that's the church, the Romanesque church with the Baroque altar, where he then moved in 1809 with all his treasures. But until then, he was spared from being sent away from his monastery. And here, you all know probably the wonderful hunting service, the Schwarzlot hunting service, which was given to the abbot for his brilliant idea. And at St. Paul, not very much has been left. Just one plate, all the rest was bought by the Mack in Vienna again in 1926. And Maria Theresa sent a letter to the abbot on the 24th of March in 1773. And she said, the black color of this service meets with my present situation because I count myself more among the dead than the ones alive. And after I realized how dedicated you are towards the dead of my house. I will be assured that you will always be thinking of me. And that's why she gave him the service, which one can assume maybe she commissioned herself, but more likely was commissioned by her father. But we don't have any documents about that. Just going back to show you very quickly some of the splendors, which in 1809, when the whole community of St. Blasien came to St. Florian, which was emptied by the Imperial secularization, they moved to St. Paul in Lavantal and brought all their treasures with them, because there were no treasures left in the monastery. All the books were gone, and now they own, for example, the Rubens sketch, and the Face of Christ is by Albrecht Dürer, and then wonderful chalices and water and wine, jugs here for the service. And then here is a very special chalice which was given to the St. Blasien Abbot, which he also took then to Carinthia when they all moved. And it's pure gold, and 300 ducats, gold ducaten, were given to the Abbot Augustinus Fink of St. Blasien by Emperor Charles VI, with the order to have a chalice made in memory of the emperor. And it, you can see the coat of arms down here, and it contains 300 diamonds and 23 rubies. And since it cost more than the 300 ducats, the emperor decided to pay the rest, but to have the chalice sent to Vienna for a few months to be looked at and admired by all the court, by all the ministers, and by the empress herself. So it was a very special piece. And then it came back to St. Blasien and eventually to St. Paul. Sorry. And I just quickly show you that's the cross you saw before, the crucifixes, and that's a monstrance, again, by Joseph Moser, very special one given to the monastery by Maria Theresa again. She was very generous, as you can see. That's the Dupaquier service, and this is for Christian Lächelt. I didn't know that they had Frankenthal figures, and Ludwigsburg, I don't know if they're worth anything, but, and I took the dating I was given by them, so we can discuss it later. The group. And they all came from the Black Forest with, just imagine how they traveled with all these treasures in the early 19th century. And they arrived in 1809, and Napoleon was still around. So it was quite an adventure. But I'm sure they were accompanied by some imperial soldiers. And just to show you what is done there today, they're very health conscious, and they won a prize for healthy kitchen cuisine at the monastery. And you can buy all kinds of herbs and wines. And very quickly to Kremsmünster, which is another amazing abbey with a very different direction. Also in Upper Austria, established in 777. And he is a chalice named after Duke Tassilo of Bavaria, who's regarded as the founder of the monastery. And there is one chapel left of that period of the 13th century. It's the tomb of Gunther, who was said to be Tassilo's son, but he didn't have a son called Gunther, and it was one of these typical legends which were probably invented, maybe with a little core of reality. The son was said to have been killed by a boar, and he is this rather charming tomb with him sleeping peacefully with his dog, who alarmed his father about his death, at his feet. And here you can see the back of the boar, so they're all sleeping on their tomb together. And this was the story which fascinated people until the mid-18th century, when suddenly there was a lot of doubt. And it meets with the era of Enlightenment, so this legend was just no longer important. And here are, it's an enormous territory of this monastery, and you can see the fish ponds and the library with a secret door, and here, quite amusingly, series of abbots until the 20th century, and the library, and then very daring abbot had a mosque built with a crescent on top and overlooking very charmingly the valley. It's also by a river and built on a high rock, and that's their hall for festivities with the water fountain guarded by a dog. It's real Baroque splendor and amazing illusionist architecture, and you can see the Baroque spirit very strong here. And what is very special about it, and which I want to show you very briefly, is the mathematical tower, which was built in 1748 to 58, with a small issue in 1750 where part of it collapsed, and since it's built on a steep rock, part of it fell onto the village, and this was of course regarded to be a sign of God by the villagers, because what is the main focus of this monastery is science, which for them replaced this legend of Gunther. Now we're in the middle of Enlightenment, and this tower is most fascinating. So if you ever get a chance to go there, it's something absolutely unique. And just to show you that it's still important, here they have a seismographic station in their basement, where they recently also measured the earthquake in Turkey, and they always hang up the latest results. And they also deliver information to the weather stations in Austria, and they are the weather station which measures the temperatures and the climate for the longest time in Austria. So there's no other station earlier than this one, and it still works. And they're very proud of contributing to science still today. And all the other floors are occupied by the scientific instruments, like here, the wonderful astronomical cabinet. And then as you go up the stairs, there's no lift, of course. The stairs are lined with 244 portraits of the most gifted students from the Ritter Academy, which was founded by Maria Theresia in 1744 for the education. So she did have her enlightened sides as well, besides the religious intolerance. And here you can see all these things which delight us so much, the instruments, the magnifying glasses, and the wonderful furniture too. And then, as you reach the top, it's my last image, if you reach the top, the guide was saying that now if you look out from this tower to the mountains in the background, so as far as your eye can reach, it's the possession. The land is in the possession of the monastery. And indeed, these monasteries are very rich. They have a lot of land, forests, and agriculture, and vineyards as well, and they are able to be completely independent financially and are also independent from the local churches. So it really is a universe of its own. And as you look out from there, from this mathematical tower, which is 50 meters high, you can see how heaven meets earth in such an institution. Thank you very much.